Some guys get invited to dinner with the in-laws. Some guys get told to order takeout and stay invisible. Guess which category I fell into when my wife Keena announced her parents' latest social arrangement. "Darren, I need to talk to you about tonight," she said, standing in our kitchen doorway wearing that navy blazer she reserved for difficult conversations. The morning light streaming through our Seattle windows caught the gold threads in the fabric, making her look like some corporate warrior preparing for battle. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing security protocols for a client's network infrastructure. Being an IT risk consultant meant I spent most mornings identifying vulnerabilities in other people's systems. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd missed the biggest security breach happening in my own home. "What's tonight?" I asked, though I already knew. Her parents had been planning their anniversary dinner for weeks, and Keena had been increasingly evasive about the details. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a tell I'd learned to recognize over our 3 years of marriage. "My parents want to have dinner with Greg instead of you." Greg Stanton, her ex-boyfriend from college, the golden boy with the government job and the trust fund who her parents had always preferred. The guy who looked like he stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog and spoke 3 languages fluently. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "And you're okay with this?" "It's just one dinner, Darren. You know how my parents are about these things. They think Greg is more presentable for their anniversary celebration." Presentable. That word hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. After years of dealing with corporate politics and client negotiations, I'd learned to hide my reactions when it mattered. "I understand," I said simply. Relief flooded her face. She'd expected a fight, maybe even wanted one to justify what she was doing. Instead, she got calm acceptance, which clearly threw her off balance. "Really? You're not upset?" "Why would I be upset? Your parents have made their preferences clear since the day we met. This just confirms what we already knew." She studied my face, looking for signs of the anger she knew should be there. When she didn't find any, she grabbed her purse and car keys with unnecessary force. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." The front door closed with a decisive click, and I heard her car pull out of our driveway. Only then did I allow myself a smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the satisfaction of a plan falling into place. I walked to my home office and opened the fireproof safe where we kept our important documents. The notarized cohabitation agreement sat right on top, exactly where I'd left it after reviewing it 3 weeks ago when I first suspected something was happening between Keena and Greg. Her father, Harold Baird, had insisted on the agreement when we moved in together last winter. "Just a precaution," he'd said in that condescending tone he used whenever he spoke to me. "Young people today don't always think these things through." At the time, I'd signed it to keep the peace. Keena had been embarrassed by her father's demands, and I'd played the understanding boyfriend who just wanted everyone to get along. But I'd read every word of that document, including the clause that assigned residency rights based on primary financial contribution and the termination procedures that could be triggered by breach of cohabitation terms. Harold Baird was a retired corporate lawyer who'd spent 40 years crafting ironclad contracts. He'd written this agreement to protect his daughter's interests, never imagining it might one day be used against her. I scanned the relevant sections and drafted a termination notice using the precise legal language Harold himself had included. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. The agreement required notification of any change in relationship status that affected the cohabitation arrangement. Keena's dinner with her ex, scheduled while explicitly excluding me, constituted such a change. I printed 2 copies, signed both, and attached the audio file I'd recorded 3 days earlier when I'd overheard her phone call with her mother. "Greg is so much more suitable for these family occasions," her mother had said, her voice carrying clearly through our thin bedroom walls. "Darren is, well, he tries, but he's not really our sort, is he?" "I know, Mom, but it's complicated." Nothing's complicated about choosing the right man, dear. Your father and I have always said Greg was perfect for you. He understands our world. The conversation had continued for another 10 minutes, with Keena agreeing to arrange tonight's dinner and promising to handle Darren. I'd recorded every word on my phone, knowing it might prove useful later. Now I attached the audio file to the termination notice and opened my laptop to begin the next phase. I logged into our shared cloud drive and located Keena's HR compliance forms from her job at Meridian Financial. As her domestic partner, I was listed as both sponsor and reference for her employment verification. Those forms required immediate notification of any change in relationship status. I forwarded the termination notice and a copy of the audio file to Meridian's legal department, along with a brief explanation that I could no longer serve as sponsor or reference due to the dissolution of our domestic partnership. Then I sent copies to her parents' family email chain, the one Harold used for all important family communications. Next, I called my attorney, Janet Morrison, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in domestic contracts and property law. Darren, this is unexpected. What can I do for you? I need you to file a termination notice with the county clerk. I'm invoking the breach clause in my cohabitation agreement. Are you sure about this? These things can get messy fast. I'm sure. I'm emailing you the documentation now. How quickly can you file it? If everything's in order, I can have it filed within the hour. But Darren, you might want to think about this. Relationships go through rough patches. This isn't a rough patch, Janet. This is a calculated decision based on documented evidence. Please file the paperwork. After hanging up, I went to our bedroom and began the methodical process of packing Keena's belongings. 3 years of shared living had accumulated more stuff than I'd expected. Clothes, books, cosmetics, jewelry, shoes. I sorted everything into labeled boxes with the same systematic approach I used for client data migrations. Each box got an inventory sheet listing the contents, and I photographed everything for documentation. Harold's legal training had rubbed off on me more than he'd probably intended. If this was going to get ugly, I wanted every detail documented. I called a courier service and arranged for delivery to the Baird family home in Bellevue. The driver would arrive at 9 a.m. sharp, requiring a signature from someone at the residence. I could picture Harold's face when he opened the door to find his daughter's entire life packed into boxes on his doorstep. By 6 p.m., I'd changed the locks and had new keys made. The locksmith, a grizzled guy named Pete, didn't ask questions when I explained I needed the work done immediately. Domestic situation? He asked while installing the new deadbolt. Something like that? Been there, buddy. These new locks are solid. Nobody's getting in without your permission. I tipped him well and settled in to wait. Keena and Greg were probably enjoying appetizers at some upscale restaurant, toasting the Baird anniversary while her parents regaled Greg with stories of their European vacation. I wondered if they'd discussed me at all, or if I'd simply been erased from the evening's narrative. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Theo, who owned a bar downtown called The Anchor. We'd known each other since college, and he had an uncanny ability to sense when I needed to talk. Beer later? You sound like you need one. I typed back, rain check, big night ahead. Everything okay? Better than okay. I'll fill you in tomorrow. At 11:30, I heard a car pull into the driveway. 2 car doors slammed, and I recognized Keena's laugh mixed with a deeper male voice. They'd brought the evening home, apparently. I positioned myself in the living room where I'd have a clear view of the front door. Janet had called 2 hours earlier to confirm the filing was complete, and the termination notice was officially on record. Keena's belongings sat neatly stacked by the door, each box labeled and inventoried according to the procedures outlined in Harold's own agreement. The key turned in the lock, or tried to. I heard muffled confusion, then more aggressive attempts to make the key work. That's weird, Keena's voice carried through the door. The lock must be stuck. I walked to the door and opened it calmly. Keena stood on the porch, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her makeup perfect despite the late hour. Behind her, Greg Stanton looked exactly like I'd remembered. Tall, confident, and completely unprepared for what he was about to witness. "Hi, Keena. How was dinner?" She stared at me, then at the boxes visible behind me in the hallway. "What's all this? Why didn't my key work?" "Your key doesn't work because this isn't your residence anymore. Your belongings are packed and ready for transport. The courier will deliver them to your parents' house in the morning." Greg stepped forward, his politician's instincts kicking in. "Now wait just a minute." "You should leave," I said without looking at him. "This is a private matter between domestic partners." "Former domestic partners." Keena pushed past me into the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she surveyed the boxes. "You can't just throw me out. I live here." "Actually, I can. And I have." I handed her a copy of the termination notice. "It's all legal and properly filed. Your father wrote an excellent contract." She scanned the document, her face growing pale as she recognized the language. "This is insane. You can't end a relationship over one dinner." "I'm not ending a relationship over one dinner. I'm ending a relationship over a pattern of deception and disrespect that culminated in tonight's dinner. There's a difference." My phone rang, and I answered it without checking the caller ID. Janet's voice filled the room through the speaker. "Darren? I just received a call from Harold Baird. He's received the documentation and wants to discuss terms. Should I patch him through?" "Put him on speaker, Janet." Harold's voice crackled through the phone with barely controlled fury. "What exactly do you think you're doing, young man?" "I'm implementing the termination clause you insisted on including in our cohabitation agreement. Section 12, subsection 4. Either party may terminate this agreement upon documented evidence of relationship status change that materially affects the cohabitation arrangement." That clause was never intended. The clause was intended to protect your interests, Harold. Tonight, it's protecting mine. Your daughter chose to exclude me from a family dinner in favor of her ex-boyfriend. That constitutes a material change in our relationship status. Keena grabbed the phone. "Daddy, he's being ridiculous. It was just one dinner." "Keena, come home immediately. We'll sort this out in the morning." Greg had been standing in the doorway, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Now he stepped back onto the porch. "Maybe I should go." "Good idea," I said. "Don't let us keep you." He disappeared into the night without another word, leaving Keena standing among her packed belongings with her father's voice demanding answers through the phone speaker. "This isn't over," she said, her composure finally cracking. "You can't just erase 3 years because you didn't get invited to one dinner. Watch me." She gathered the boxes she could carry and loaded them into her car with sharp, angry movements. It took 3 trips, and I helped with the heavier items because, despite everything, I wasn't cruel. When the last box was loaded, she stood by her car looking lost. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Your parents have a big house. I'm sure they'll make room." She drove away without another word, leaving me standing in my driveway in the cool Seattle night. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying had suddenly lifted. I went back inside and poured myself a glass of the expensive whiskey Keena had bought for special occasions. This seemed like an appropriate time to open it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This was a mistake. You'll regret this." I deleted the message without responding and settled into my recliner with my drink. Tomorrow would bring complications, angry phone calls, and probably threats of legal action. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The next phase would require careful planning and perfect execution. Keena thought she could humiliate me with impunity, that I'd simply accept whatever scraps of respect she chose to throw my way. Her parents believed they could manipulate our relationship to suit their social preferences. They were all about to learn otherwise. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The digital avalanche had started around 6 a.m. when Harold Baird apparently decided that early morning intimidation was his best strategy. The messages followed a predictable pattern: outrage, threats, demands for immediate reversal, and increasingly creative descriptions of my character flaws. But the one that caught my attention came from Kina at 5:47 a.m. "My parents are furious. You've made a huge mistake." I made coffee and checked my email while the Seattle morning rain drummed against my kitchen windows. Janet had sent a summary of the legal filings, all properly documented and submitted. Meridian Financial's automated response confirmed receipt of my sponsorship withdrawal. The courier service had scheduled delivery for 9 a.m. sharp. At 8:15, my phone rang. Kina's name appeared on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately, then again. On the fourth attempt, I answered. "Good morning, Kina." "Don't you dare good morning me. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd spent the night arguing with her parents instead of sleeping. I could picture her in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the pink wallpaper and horse posters that Harold and Evelyn had preserved like a shrine to her teenage years. "I've implemented a legal termination of our cohabitation agreement. The documentation is quite clear. My job, Darren. You've jeopardized my job. HR called this morning with questions about my domestic partner status. They're launching a compliance review." I sipped my coffee and watched a delivery truck turn onto my street, right on schedule. "That's unfortunate. You might want to update your employment records to reflect your current living situation." "This is insane. You can't destroy someone's life over a dinner invitation." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply declining to participate in my own humiliation." "There's a difference." The delivery truck stopped in front of the house, and I watched the driver begin unloading boxes onto a dolly. My timing had been perfect. "The courier is at your parents' house right now," I said. "You might want to call them." The line went quiet except for the sound of her breathing. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to a whisper. "You recorded my conversation with my mother." "I recorded a conversation that took place in my home between my domestic partner and a third party discussing my exclusion from family events. That recording documents the change in relationship status that triggered the termination clause." "That's illegal." "Actually, it's not. Washington is a two-party consent state for private conversations, but your mother wasn't in our home. You were. The conversation took place in a shared domestic space, which gives me legal standing to document it. Your father would know that if he'd researched the privacy laws as thoroughly as he researched the property rights." Another long silence. I could almost hear her mind working, trying to find an angle that would give her leverage. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything from you, Kina. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You chose Greg and your parents' approval over our relationship. Now, you get to live with that choice." It was one dinner. It was the final dinner. The pattern started months ago with the casual comments about Greg's success, the comparisons to his career trajectory, the suggestions that maybe I wasn't ambitious enough for your family's standards. Last night was just the culmination. I hung up and immediately called Theo. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "It's time for Phase 2. Can you meet me at the Anchor this afternoon?" "Phase 2 of what? You were cryptic as hell last night." "I'll explain everything. Bring your laptop and your contact list. We're going to tell a story." The Anchor occupied a narrow building in Pioneer Square, wedged between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. Theo had bought it 5 years earlier when the previous owner couldn't make the rent, and he'd transformed it into the kind of place where Seattle's tech workers and creative types gathered to complain about their jobs and plan their next career moves. More importantly, it was the kind of place where gossip spread like wildfire through the city's professional networks. I arrived at 3 p.m. to find Theo setting up chairs in the back room. He'd inherited his mother's Irish features and his father's Lebanese temper, a combination that made him an excellent bartender and an even better friend. "All right," he said. "What's this about? And why do you look like you haven't slept?" I told him everything: the dinner invitation, the recording, the legal maneuvers, and Keena's belongings delivered to her parents' doorstep like a public announcement of her changed circumstances. Theo listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and grinned. "You magnificent bastard, you actually did it." "I'm just getting started. What do you need from me?" "Your Thursday night networking group, the one with all the HR directors and corporate communications people. I want to tell them a story about professional ethics and personal accountability." Theo's Thursday group was legendary in Seattle's professional circles. 25 carefully selected individuals who represented the city's major employers, all gathered under the pretense of informal networking, but really functioning as the most efficient gossip distribution system in the Pacific Northwest. You want to destroy her reputation. I want to ensure that accurate information reaches the appropriate audiences. There's a difference. He pulled out his laptop and started typing. "What's the angle?" "HR director violates company policy by misrepresenting domestic partner status while conducting personal relationship with former romantic partner. Creates compliance issues for employer and raises questions about professional judgment." That's cold, man. Effective, but cold. She thought she could humiliate me without consequences. Time to test that theory. We spent 2 hours crafting the narrative. Not lies. I'd learned enough from Harold's legal training to know that truth was always the strongest foundation. Just facts presented in a way that highlighted the professional implications of Keena's choices. By Thursday evening, the anchor's back room buzzed with conversation. Theo's group included HR directors from 3 major tech companies, 2 hospital systems, the city government, and the University of Washington. They were smart, connected, and always hungry for stories that illuminated the intersection of personal drama and professional consequences. I told them about the compliance issues that arose when domestic partners misrepresented their relationship status to employers. I discussed the legal implications of using company resources to facilitate personal relationships with former romantic partners. I mentioned the challenges that arose when family social pressures influenced professional decision-making. I never mentioned Keena by name. I didn't have to. "This is about that Meridian financial situation, isn't it?" asked Rebecca Chen, who handled HR for one of the city's largest law firms. "I heard they're doing a full compliance review of their domestic partner policies." I couldn't comment on any specific situation, I said with a straight face. I'm just speaking generally about the issues that can arise. "Of course," she said with a knowing smile. "Hypothetically speaking." The conversation continued for another hour, with each participant adding their own experiences and insights. By the time the evening ended, the story had taken on a life of its own, spreading through the professional networks like water, finding the lowest point. I drove home through the rainy Seattle streets, feeling satisfied with the evening's work. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with calls from Keena and her parents, but I'd let them all go to voicemail. Whatever they had to say could wait until morning. The next day brought the first real consequences. Keena called at 7 a.m., her voice tight with controlled panic. "They're questioning everything. My supervisor wants to meet this afternoon to discuss my employment status. They're saying there might be issues with my work visa sponsorship." "That sounds complicated." "Don't play dumb, Darren. I know you're behind this. The timing is too convenient. I withdrew my sponsorship of your domestic partner status because we're no longer domestic partners. That's a legal requirement, not a personal attack. My visa depends on that sponsorship. Your visa depends on having a qualifying relationship or alternative sponsorship. You'll need to find another solution." "Like what?" "I'm sure Greg would be happy to help. He works for the city government, doesn't he? They must have immigration resources." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, Her voice had changed, becoming harder and more calculating. "You think you're so clever. But this isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's not." That afternoon, I received a call from Janet Morrison. "Darren, I need to warn you about something. Harold Baird contacted my office this morning. He's threatening to challenge the termination on procedural grounds." "What kind of procedural grounds?" "He claims the recording was obtained illegally and that the termination notice was filed in bad faith. He's also suggesting that your withdrawal of employment sponsorship constitutes harassment." Can he make any of that stick? Probably not, but he can make your life difficult while he tries. These family law disputes can get ugly fast, especially when there's wounded pride involved. Let him try. I've got documentation for everything, and I followed his own procedures to the letter. Just be careful. Harold Baird has a lot of connections in this city, and he's not used to losing. That evening, I drove to Greg Stanton's apartment building in Capitol Hill. I'd done some research on the city's golden boy and discovered that his life wasn't quite as perfect as the Bairds believed. His last performance review mentioned interpersonal challenges with female colleagues. His divorce 2 years earlier had involved allegations of emotional manipulation. His current apartment was a rental, despite the trust fund his family supposedly provided. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:30, Greg emerged from the building wearing running gear. He looked both ways before stepping onto the sidewalk, a habit that suggested he might be expecting trouble. I got out of my car and walked toward him with a casual pace. When he spotted me, his body language shifted immediately from relaxed to defensive. "What are you doing here?" "Taking a walk. Nice neighborhood. I can see why you chose it." "This is harassment. This is a public sidewalk. I have as much right to be here as you do." He glanced around, probably hoping for witnesses, but the street was empty except for a few parked cars and the distant sound of traffic from Pine Street. "Look, Darren, I'm sorry about how this whole thing went down, but Keena and we have history. You can understand that. I understand that you helped destroy my relationship for the sake of a dinner invitation. What I don't understand is why you thought there wouldn't be consequences. There don't have to be consequences. We're all adults here. We can work this out." I stepped closer, close enough that he had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. "Here's what's going to happen, Greg. You're going to stay away from Keena. You're going to stop taking calls from the Baird family, and you're going to find somewhere else to run. Or what? Or I'll make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of man you really are, starting with your supervisor at the city planning office." His face went pale. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining the natural consequences of your choices. You wanted to play games with other people's lives. Now you get to find out what happens when someone plays back." I walked back to my car without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I watched Greg standing on the sidewalk, his running plans apparently forgotten. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. "The story's spreading. Meridian Financial is all over the professional networks. Someone leaked that they're reviewing their entire domestic partner program." I typed back, "Good. Let them review everything." The next morning brought a surprise. Evelyn Baird called my office directly, somehow obtaining my work number despite my efforts to keep my professional and personal lives separate. "Darren, this is Evelyn Baird. I think we need to talk." "I don't think we do, Mrs. Baird. You're destroying my daughter's life over a misunderstanding. Surely we can find a reasonable solution." "The only misunderstanding was mine. I misunderstood how little respect your family had for me. We've always tried to include you. You've always tried to tolerate me. There's a difference. What do you want? Money? We can discuss compensation for any inconvenience you've experienced." The offer hung in the air like an insult wrapped in politeness. Evelyn Baird genuinely believed that everything could be solved with the right financial arrangement, that my wounded pride could be purchased like any other commodity. "I don't want your money, Mrs. Baird. I want your daughter to experience the consequences of her choices. This is vindictive and cruel. This is logical and proportionate. Your daughter chose to humiliate me publicly. Now she gets to experience public humiliation in return. I hung up and immediately called Janet to document the attempted bribery. If the Bairds wanted to escalate this situation, I'd make sure every move was properly recorded and legally defensible. The weekend brought the first signs that my strategy was working. Keena's social media presence, once filled with carefully curated images of professional success and family gatherings, had gone completely silent. The Meridian Financial Compliance Review had apparently expanded beyond her individual case to examine their entire domestic partner program. Most importantly, Greg had stopped returning her calls. Theo called Sunday evening with an update from his network. The stories reached the city government. Apparently, someone in Greg's office heard about his involvement and started asking questions about his relationship with external job candidates. Keena's looking for work? According to my sources, Meridian put her on administrative leave pending the compliance review. She's been reaching out to contacts about interim opportunities. And Greg's been helping with introductions? Was helping. Past tense. Word is he got a talking to from his supervisor about potential conflicts of interest. I felt a satisfaction that was probably unhealthy, but entirely justified. The web of consequences was spreading exactly as I'd hoped, each thread connecting to others in ways that multiplied the impact of every revelation. But I wasn't finished. Phase 2 had been about professional consequences and social embarrassment. Phase 3 would be more personal. It was time to ensure that Keena and Greg understood exactly what they'd lost when they chose to exclude me from their perfect little dinner party. The Spring Gala was Seattle's most important social event, a charity fundraiser that brought together the city's political, business, and cultural elite. The kind of event where careers were made, deals were struck, and reputations were either enhanced or destroyed in the span of a single evening. It was also the kind of event where the Baird family had maintained a prominent presence for over 20 years, and where Greg Stanton had been building his political network since his return to Seattle. I'd never attended before. Keena had always found reasons why I shouldn't join her. Too expensive, too formal, not really my crowd. This year I bought a ticket and a new tuxedo. The gala was held at the Four Seasons, in the ballroom overlooking Elliott Bay. I arrived early and positioned myself at the bar where I could observe the entrance without being immediately visible to arriving guests. The crowd was exactly what I'd expected. Older money mixed with newer tech wealth, city officials networking with business leaders, non-profit directors working the room for donations. The kind of gathering where everyone knew everyone else's business, and gossip traveled faster than the champagne. At 7:30, the Baird family made their entrance. Harold wore his standard formal uniform of perfectly tailored black tuxedo and family crest cufflinks. Evelyn glided beside him in navy silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And between them, looking elegant but strained, walked Keena. She'd chosen a red dress I'd never seen before, something that screamed expensive and desperate in equal measure. Her smile was perfectly calibrated for the cameras that flashed as the family paused for photos, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from across the room. Greg arrived 20 minutes later with a group of city officials, his politician's smile firmly in place as he worked his way through the crowd. He looked confident, comfortable, completely at ease in this environment that had always made me feel like an outsider. I waited until both groups had settled into their respective social orbits before making my first move. The silent auction tables lined the ballroom's perimeter, displaying everything from weekend getaways to private dining experiences. I made a point of circulating through the crowd, stopping to chat with people I recognized from Theo's networking events. "Darren? I didn't expect to see you here," said Marcus Webb, who handled corporate communications for one of the city's largest tech companies. I decided it was time to expand my social horizons. "How are you holding up? I heard about the situation with Meridian Financial." Word traveled fast in Seattle's professional circles. "I'm doing fine. These things have a way of working themselves out. Still, it must be difficult, especially seeing her here tonight." I followed his gaze across the room to where Kina stood with her parents, accepting condolences from family friends who'd apparently heard about her temporary housing situation. Actually, it's quite liberating. Amazing how much clarity you gain when you stop pretending everything's fine. Marcus nodded knowingly. I imagine there are some interesting stories behind all this. There always are. The truth usually comes out eventually. I excused myself and continued circulating, dropping similar hints with other acquaintances. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be construed as malicious gossip. Just a man being philosophical about his changed circumstances. At 9 o'clock, I stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace and made a phone call to a contact I'd cultivated over the past week. Tommy Rodriguez ran a small aviation advertising company that specialized in skywriting and banner towing for special events. Tommy, it's Darren Holloway. Is everything ready for tonight? All set. The plane's fueled and the messages programmed. Just give me the word. Now would be perfect. I returned to the ballroom and positioned myself near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered the best view of the sky above Elliott Bay. The spring evening was clear, with enough ambient light from the city to make skywriting visible against the darkening sky. It took 15 minutes for someone to notice. A woman near the windows pointed upward, and conversation began to shift as more people moved to look outside. The message was simple, elegant, and devastating. Ask Kina about Greg, a concerned friend. The letters hung in the sky like an accusation, impossible to ignore and visible to everyone in the ballroom. Conversations stopped. Phones came out. Social media posts began appearing in real time. I watched Kina's face as she realized what was happening. The careful composure she'd maintained all evening cracked like glass, replaced by a mixture of horror and rage that was almost beautiful in its intensity. Harold Baird's reaction was even more satisfying. The man who'd spent decades controlling narratives and managing his family's public image stood frozen as his daughter's private drama became the evening's main entertainment. Greg tried to disappear into the crowd, but it was too late. The connection had been made, and Seattle's social elite were nothing if not efficient at processing scandal. "Well," said Marcus Webb, appearing beside me at the window, "that's one way to make a statement." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." He grinned and raised his champagne glass. "To clarity." The rest of the evening unfolded exactly as I'd hoped. Kina and her family made an early exit, pushing through the crowd with the kind of desperate urgency that only confirmed the message's accuracy. Greg lasted another hour before giving up and leaving through a side entrance. Meanwhile, the story spread through the ballroom like wildfire. By the time I left at midnight, Ask Kina about Greg was trending on local social media, and someone had already created a satirical website documenting the evening's events. I drove home through empty streets, feeling more satisfied than I had in months. The professional consequences had been effective, but public humiliation was proving even more powerful. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from Kina, her parents, and even Greg. I ignored them all. Whatever they had to say could wait until they'd had time to fully appreciate their new circumstances. The next morning brought a flood of media attention. The Seattle Times ran a society page story about the gala that mentioned an unusual aerial display that captured attendees' attention. The Stranger, never one to miss a good scandal, published a more detailed account under the headline, "Sky-High Drama at Spring Gala." But the real impact was happening in the professional networks, where reputations were built and destroyed. Theo called with updates throughout the day. Meridian Financial is distancing themselves from the whole situation. Word is they're going to terminate Kina's employment rather than risk the compliance investigation. What about Greg? City Ethics Office is asking questions about his relationship with job seekers. Apparently someone filed a complaint about potential conflicts of interest. That's unfortunate. You filed the complaint, didn't you? I filed a public records request asking for information about the city's policies regarding employee relationships with external job candidates. Completely legal and within my rights as a taxpayer. You magnificent, vindictive genius. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Harold Baird appeared at my office, somehow bypassing building security and arriving at my door like an avenging angel in a three-piece suit. "You've gone too far," he said without preamble. "Have I? I'm not sure what you're referring to." "The skywriting, the media attention, the deliberate destruction of my daughter's reputation. Your daughter destroyed her own reputation when she chose to conduct her personal life in a way that violated professional ethics standards. I just made sure the appropriate people were aware of the situation. This is harassment, and I won't stand for it. This is accountability, Harold, something your family has managed to avoid for years." He stepped closer to my desk, his face flushed with anger. "I can destroy you. One phone call to the right people and your consulting business will disappear overnight. You're welcome to try, but you might want to consider whether you really want to escalate this situation further." "What's that supposed to mean?" I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. The screen showed a detailed timeline of Keena's relationship with Greg, complete with dates, locations, and photographic evidence I'd gathered over the past weeks. It means that everything I've done so far has been relatively gentle. Public embarrassment, professional consequences, social awkwardness. But if you want to make this a war, I can show you what real destruction looks like. His eyes scanned the screen, taking in the implications of what I'd compiled. "You've been stalking them." "I've been documenting their activities in public spaces. There's a legal difference, as you well know." "What do you want?" "I want your family to understand that actions have consequences. I want Keena to experience the same humiliation she inflicted on me. And I want Greg to learn that other people's relationships aren't his playground." "And then what? This ends?" "That depends entirely on whether they've learned their lesson." Harold left without another word, but I could see in his eyes that he finally understood the scope of what he was dealing with. This wasn't a wounded ex-boyfriend acting out in anger. This was a systematic campaign designed to achieve specific objectives. That evening, Keena called from her parents' house. "Please," she said, her voice stripped of its usual confidence. "Can we talk? In person?" "I don't think that's necessary. I'll do anything, just please stop this." "Stop what? I haven't done anything to you." "The skywriting, the professional sabotage, the media attention. You're destroying my life." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply ensuring that accurate information reaches the appropriate audiences." "What do you want from me?" It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. The confident woman who'd dismissed me so casually just weeks earlier had been replaced by someone who finally understood the price of her choices. "I don't want anything from you, Keena. I want you to understand that you can't treat people like disposable conveniences. I want you to realize that your actions affect other people's lives." "I understand, I get it. Can we please just move on?" "Moving on requires accepting consequences. You're not there yet." I hung up and poured myself a drink. Phase 3 had been even more effective than I'd hoped, but I wasn't finished. The public humiliation had been satisfying, but it was time for something more personal. It was time to ensure that Keena and Greg understood exactly what they'd lost when they chose each other over basic human decency. The final phase would require careful planning and perfect timing. But I had both, along with something my opponents lacked, nothing left to lose. The beauty of Harold Baird's cohabitation agreement wasn't just in its termination clause, it was in the comprehensive asset protection provisions he'd insisted on including. The man had been so focused on protecting his daughter's interests that he'd created a legal framework I could use to systematically dismantle her financial security. I spent Monday morning in Janet Morrison's office reviewing every clause and subsection of the agreement with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. The bad faith provision is particularly interesting, Janet said, pointing to Section 15. If either party can demonstrate that the other acted in bad faith during the relationship, it triggers accelerated asset recovery procedures. Define bad faith. Deliberate deception regarding the nature or status of the relationship, particularly deception that affects shared financial obligations or legal standings. I smiled. Like misrepresenting the relationship to employers, government agencies, or financial institutions. Exactly like that. We spent 2 hours documenting Keena's violations. Her employment forms listed me as her domestic partner, while she was actively pursuing a relationship with Greg. Her lease application included my income and credit score as supporting documentation. Her car insurance claimed the multi-vehicle discount based on our shared residence. Each misrepresentation constituted bad faith under Harold's own contract language. What's the timeline for asset recovery? I asked. Immediate freeze on all joint accounts, followed by division according to documented contributions. Since you can prove you've been the primary financial contributor for the past 18 months, you're entitled to retain approximately 70% of shared assets. Including the emergency fund? Including everything. Harold wrote this agreement to be ironclad. He just never imagined it would be used against his daughter. I authorized Janet to begin immediate proceedings. Within hours, every joint account was frozen, every shared credit card was canceled, and every financial institution that held our combined assets received legal notification of the bad faith determination. Keena's world shrank to whatever cash she had in her personal checking account. But money was just the beginning. The real leverage came from the immigration implications of our dissolved partnership. I called the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office and requested an appointment to discuss the termination of my domestic partner sponsorship. The immigration officer, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Gonzalez, reviewed my documentation with professional efficiency. You understand that terminating sponsorship will affect your partner's legal status? Former partner. And yes, I understand the implications. She'll need to find alternative sponsorship or face potential deportation proceedings. I'm sure she'll figure something out. Patricia stamped the termination forms and handed me copies. This goes into effect immediately. Ms. Baird will receive notification within 48 hours. I drove home through afternoon traffic, feeling the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. My phone had been buzzing with increasingly frantic calls from Keena and her parents, but I'd let them all go to voicemail. Whatever crisis they were managing could wait until they'd had time to fully appreciate their new reality. That evening, Theo called with an update from his network. Meridian Financial made it official. Keena's employment was terminated this afternoon. They're citing the compliance violations and the media attention as grounds for dismissal. What about severance? None. They're claiming she violated her employment contract by misrepresenting her domestic partner's status. That seems harsh. That seems like exactly what she deserves. I agreed, but I wasn't finished. Greg still needed to understand his role in this disaster, and I had plans for Mr. City Government that would make his participation in Keena's life considerably more expensive. I'd done research on Greg's professional situation and discovered several interesting details. His position with the city planning office required maintaining public trust and avoiding conflicts of interest. His divorce settlement included specific clauses about his conduct with other women. And his apartment lease was in his ex-wife's name, a detail that suggested his financial situation wasn't as stable as he pretended. Wednesday morning, I visited the city planning office during public comment hours. As a taxpayer, I had the right to address the Planning Commission about matters of public concern. I'd like to discuss the importance of ethical conduct among city employees, I told the commission chairman. What specific issue are you addressing? The potential for conflicts of interest when city employees use their positions to facilitate personal relationships with job seekers or individuals seeking city services. I spent 15 minutes outlining a hypothetical situation involving a city employee who provided professional assistance to someone he was personally involved with, creating potential liability for the city and undermining public trust in government institutions. I never mentioned Greg by name. I didn't have to. The commission chairman thanked me for my comments and assured me that the city took such concerns seriously. Within hours, Greg received a call from his supervisor requesting a meeting to discuss his professional conduct. That afternoon, I received a call from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Greg's ex-wife, Linda Stanton. "Mr. Halloway? This is Linda Stanton. I think we should talk." "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mrs. Stanton. We have Greg in common, and I have information you might find useful." We met at a coffee shop in Fremont, away from the downtown areas where we might encounter mutual acquaintances. Linda was an attractive woman in her early 40s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested success in whatever field she'd chosen after her divorce. "Greg contacted me yesterday," she said without preamble. "He wants to modify our divorce settlement." "Why would he do that?" "Because he's in financial trouble. His city job doesn't pay as much as he pretends, and he's been living beyond his means for years. Now he's facing potential disciplinary action, and he needs money fast." "What kind of modification?" "He wants to reduce his alimony payments and change the custody arrangement for our daughter. Claims his circumstances have changed due to external harassment affecting his employment." I sipped my coffee and considered the implications. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if his circumstances have changed, maybe we should examine why. That's when he mentioned you." "What did he say about me?" "That you're a vindictive ex-boyfriend who's been stalking him and his new girlfriend, that you've been interfering with his job and his personal life." "And you believed him?" Linda smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I've been married to Greg for 8 years. I know when he's lying. More importantly, I know when he's been caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing." "What do you mean?" "Greg has a pattern. He targets women who are in vulnerable situations, relationship problems, career transitions, family issues. He presents himself as the solution to their problems, offers support and understanding, then moves in when they're grateful and dependent." "That sounds like what happened with Keena." "I'm sure it is. The question is whether you want to stop him from doing it again." Linda opened her purse and pulled out a folder. "These are copies of emails and text messages I recovered from our shared computer accounts before the divorce. They document Greg's relationships with 3 different women during our marriage, including detailed descriptions of how he manipulated their professional situations to create dependency." I reviewed the documents, feeling a mixture of disgust and admiration for Linda's thoroughness. The evidence was damning, showing a clear pattern of predatory behavior that went far beyond simple infidelity. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Greg is trying to use his relationship with your ex-wife to reduce his financial obligations to me and our daughter. I want him to understand that some people fight back. What do you want me to do with this information?" "Whatever you think is appropriate. But I thought you should know that you're not his first victim, and you won't be his last unless someone stops him." I thanked Linda and drove home with the folder on my passenger seat. The evidence she'd provided opened up possibilities I hadn't considered, ways to ensure that Greg's participation in Keena's life would have consequences that extended far beyond professional embarrassment. That evening, I called Keena's parents' house. Harold answered on the second ring, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What do you want, Darren?" "I want to discuss the terms of Keena's surrender." "Surrender?" "Her acknowledgement that this situation has reached its logical conclusion. I'm prepared to offer terms that would allow everyone to move forward with minimal additional damage." "What kind of terms?" "Keena issues a public apology acknowledging her professional misconduct and personal betrayal. Greg ends all contact with your family and agrees to stay away from Keena permanently. And you, Harold, acknowledge that your interference in our relationship was inappropriate and harmful. And in return, I stop actively pursuing additional consequences. The financial and professional damage that's already occurred stands, but I don't escalate further. That's not negotiation. That's extortion. That's reality. Your daughter's choices have consequences. Greg's behavior has consequences. Your family's treatment of me has consequences. I'm offering you a chance to limit those consequences before they become permanent. We need time to consider this. You have until Friday. After that, I proceed with Phase 4. What's Phase 4? You don't want to find out. I hung up and poured myself a drink. The folder from Linda Stanton sat on my kitchen table, its contents representing a nuclear option that would destroy not just Greg's relationship with Keena, but his entire carefully constructed public image. Part of me hoped they'd reject my offer. The systematic dismantling of their lives had become almost addictive, each revelation and consequence building on the last to create a cascade of destruction that felt both inevitable and justified. But another part of me, the part that still remembered loving Keena despite everything she'd done, hoped they'd be smart enough to accept defeat gracefully. Friday would tell me which part of me would get its wish. Friday arrived with Seattle's typical spring weather, gray skies and intermittent rain that matched my mood perfectly. I'd given Harold Baird and his family exactly 96 hours to consider my terms, and the silence from their end suggested they were either planning capitulation or preparing for war. At 10 a.m., my phone rang. Harold's name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring twice before answering. Good morning, Harold. We reject your terms. His voice carried the authoritative tone he'd probably used to intimidate opposing counsel for decades. Furthermore, we're prepared to file harassment charges and seek a restraining order. I see. And you've discussed this decision with Keena and Greg? This is a family decision. We won't be bullied by someone who clearly can't handle the end of a relationship like a mature adult. I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. They'd chosen the hard way, which meant I could proceed with a clear conscience. That's unfortunate, Harold. I was hoping we could resolve this amicably. There's nothing amicable about your behavior. You've cost my daughter her job, her housing, and her immigration status. Enough is enough. You're right. Enough is enough. Thank you for clarifying where everyone stands. I hung up and immediately called Linda Stanton. Linda, it's Darren Holloway. Are you still willing to share that information we discussed? Absolutely. What do you need? Everything. And I need it today. We met at the same coffee shop, but this time Linda brought a larger folder and a laptop computer. She'd spent the past week organizing the evidence into a comprehensive timeline that documented Greg's pattern of manipulation and predatory behavior. This goes back 6 years, she said, opening the laptop to show me a detailed spreadsheet. 3 women during our marriage, plus at least 2 more since our divorce. He targets women who are professionally vulnerable, recent divorces, job transitions, immigration issues. Like Keena. Exactly like Keena. He presents himself as supportive and understanding, offers to help with their professional problems, then uses their gratitude and dependency to manipulate them into relationships. The evidence was devastating. Email chains showing Greg coaching women on how to misrepresent their circumstances to employers. Text messages revealing his contempt for the women he was supposedly helping. Financial records showing how he'd used their resources while contributing nothing himself. The most recent case is particularly relevant, Linda continued, clicking to a new section. A woman named Maria Santos, who works for the State Environmental Agency. Greg helped her navigate some immigration paperwork, then convinced her to list him as her domestic partner for benefits purposes. While he was seeing both Keena and Maria, neither knew about the other. I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of disgust and strategic excitement. This wasn't just evidence of Greg's pattern. It was proof of active fraud that could destroy him professionally and personally. What do you want me to do with this? I want you to make sure Greg understands that his actions have consequences. and I want to protect other women from going through what I went through. Consider it done. I spent the afternoon preparing what I privately called the nuclear option, a comprehensive dossier that would simultaneously destroy Greg's career, expose his fraudulent activities, and demonstrate to Keena exactly what kind of man she'd chosen over me. The dossier included Linda's evidence, my own documentation of Greg's relationship with Keena, and copies of the fraudulent domestic partner claims he'd filed with multiple agencies. I organized it into a professional presentation that could be easily distributed to relevant authorities and media contacts. At 6 p.m., I sent copies to the City Ethics Office, the State Environmental Agency's Internal Affairs Department, and the Immigration Fraud Hotline. I also sent copies to 3 local journalists who specialized in government corruption stories. Then I called Greg directly. "Darren, what the hell do you want?" "I want to give you a heads up about some information that's about to become public." "What are you talking about?" "Check your email. I've sent you a copy of the same dossier that's currently being reviewed by City Ethics, State Internal Affairs, and federal immigration authorities." The line went silent, except for the sound of typing. When Greg spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "You can't do this. This is harassment, stalking, defamation. This is documentation of your fraudulent activities, provided to the appropriate authorities by concerned citizens. Everything in that dossier is factual and verifiable." "Linda gave you this information." "Linda provided evidence of your pattern of fraudulent behavior. Maria Santos provided additional documentation when I contacted her yesterday. Apparently, she was very interested to learn about your relationship with Keena." "You contacted Maria?" "I contacted a woman who'd been defrauded by someone claiming to be her domestic partner, while simultaneously claiming the same status with another woman. She was quite helpful once she understood the scope of your activities." Another long silence. When Greg spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" "I want you to disappear. Permanently. No contact with Keena, no contact with her family, no contact with anyone in their social circle. You're going to need all your energy to deal with the legal consequences of your fraudulent activities." "And if I refuse?" "You're not in a position to refuse anything. The evidence is already with the authorities. Your career is over, your immigration fraud is documented, and your pattern of predatory behavior is about to become public knowledge." I hung up and immediately called Keena. "Darren, thank God. We need to talk." "Actually, we don't. But you need to know that Greg won't be available to provide emotional support anymore." "What do you mean?" "Check the news tomorrow. Your boyfriend is about to become very famous for all the wrong reasons." "What have you done?" "I've documented his fraudulent activities and provided that documentation to the appropriate authorities. The same fraudulent activities that include his relationship with you." "I don't understand." "Greg claimed you as his domestic partner for city benefits while simultaneously claiming another woman for state benefits. That's federal fraud, Keena. You're not just his girlfriend, you're his accomplice." The sound of her breathing changed, becoming rapid and shallow. "That's not possible. He wouldn't." "He would, and he did. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable. You might want to contact a criminal defense attorney." "This is insane. You're destroying innocent people." "I'm exposing fraudulent behavior and holding people accountable for their choices. There's a difference." I hung up and poured myself a drink. The nuclear option had been deployed, and the consequences would unfold over the next few days like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. My phone immediately started ringing with calls from Keena, her parents, and presumably Greg, but I ignored them all. Whatever panic they were experiencing was entirely appropriate given the scope of what they were about to face. The next morning brought the first wave of media coverage. The Seattle Times ran a front-page story about immigration fraud in city government. The Stranger published a more detailed investigation into Greg's pattern of predatory behavior. Local television news picked up the story and ran interviews with Maria Santos and Linda Stanton. By noon, Greg had been suspended from his city job pending investigation. By evening, federal agents had visited his apartment to discuss his immigration fraud activities. Keena called from her parents' house, her voice barely recognizable. "Please, Darren, I'm begging you. Make this stop." "I can't make anything stop. The authorities are handling their investigations according to their own procedures." "You know what I mean. The media attention, the public humiliation, the destruction of everyone's lives." "I'm not destroying anyone's life. I'm simply ensuring that accurate information reaches the appropriate audiences." "What do you want from me? I'll do anything. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to realize that you can't treat people like disposable conveniences, and I want you to experience the same humiliation and betrayal that you inflicted on me." "I understand now. I get it. Can we please just stop this?" "We're not stopping anything. This is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" "Greg's fraud investigation will take months. His trial will be public. Your involvement will be documented and reported. Your immigration status is in jeopardy. Your professional reputation is destroyed. And your parents' social standing has been permanently damaged. You're talking about years of consequences." "I'm talking about appropriate consequences for the choices you made. This isn't justice, Darren. This is revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing." I hung up and checked the news coverage on my laptop. The story was spreading beyond Seattle's local media, picked up by regional outlets and legal blogs that specialized in government corruption cases. Greg's carefully constructed public image was being systematically dismantled, replaced by documented evidence of fraud, manipulation, and predatory behavior. Keena's role as his unwitting accomplice was being examined in detail, raising questions about her own professional judgment and legal culpability. Harold and Evelyn Baird, who'd spent decades cultivating their reputation in Seattle's social circles, were now associated with a federal fraud investigation and a daughter whose poor judgment had enabled criminal activity. The cascade of consequences was everything I'd hoped for and more. But I wasn't finished. There was still one more move to make, one final demonstration that would ensure everyone understood exactly what they'd lost when they chose to exclude me from their perfect little dinner party. It was time for the grand finale. The final confrontation came sooner than I'd expected. On Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after Keena's dinner with Greg, I received a call from Harold Baird that was different from his previous attempts at intimidation or negotiation. "Darren, this is Harold. Keena wants to meet with you, in person, to discuss ending this situation." "There's nothing to discuss. The investigations are proceeding according to their own timelines." She's prepared to make a full public apology, to acknowledge everything you've accused her of, and take full responsibility for her actions. I considered this development while watching the evening news coverage of Greg's arrest on federal fraud charges. The story had grown beyond local interest, picked up by national outlets as an example of government corruption and immigration fraud. "What kind of apology?" "A written statement acknowledging her professional misconduct, her betrayal of your relationship, and her poor judgment in associating with Greg. She'll distribute it to all the professional networks where her reputation was damaged. And in return, you stop actively pursuing additional consequences. No more media contacts, no more evidence to investigators, no more public humiliation." The offer was tempting, but I sensed there was more to this sudden capitulation than Harold was revealing. Keena had never shown any inclination toward genuine remorse, and her parents had spent 3 weeks trying to intimidate me into backing down. "Where does she want to meet?" "Neutral territory, the lobby of the Four Seasons where this all started, tomorrow evening at 7. I'll be there." I hung up and immediately called Linda Stanton to update her on the latest developments. "Be careful," she warned. "Harold Baird didn't build his reputation by surrendering easily. This could be a trap." "What kind of trap?" The kind where they record you saying something they can use against you, or where they have witnesses to testify that you threatened them. Harold spent 40 years finding ways to destroy people legally. Then I'll make sure I'm prepared for whatever they're planning. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable clarity, the spring sky bright and cloudless as I walked into the Four Seasons lobby. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a dark suit that projected professional competence without appearing overly formal. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in this environment, not the outsider I'd always been in Keena's world. The lobby was busy with the usual mix of hotel guests and local professionals meeting for drinks or dinner. I positioned myself at a table near the windows, where I could observe the entrance while maintaining a clear view of the entire space. Keena arrived precisely at 7, wearing a black dress that was elegant but subdued. She looked tired, older somehow, as if the past 3 weeks had aged her in ways that went beyond simple stress. Her usual confidence had been replaced by something more cautious, more aware of consequences. She spotted me immediately and walked over with measured steps, sitting across from me without the casual familiarity that had characterized our relationship. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You said you wanted to apologize." "I do. But first, I need you to understand something about what you've done." I leaned back in my chair, immediately alert. This wasn't the tone of someone preparing to surrender. "What I've done is hold you accountable for your choices. What you've done is destroy multiple lives over a dinner invitation. Greg is facing federal charges. I'm unemployed and facing deportation. My parents' reputation has been permanently damaged. All because you couldn't handle being excluded from one family event. All because you chose to betray our relationship and humiliate me publicly. The consequences you're experiencing are proportionate to the harm you caused." Are they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've become obsessed with revenge to the point where you can't see how disproportionate your response has been. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation tactics I'd learned to recognize. But instead of calculation, I saw something that looked almost like genuine concern. "You think I've gone too far?" "I think you've lost perspective. The man I married wouldn't have destroyed someone's life over hurt feelings. The woman I married wouldn't have betrayed our relationship for her parents' approval. You're right. I made terrible choices, and I hurt you in ways that were inexcusable. But what you've done in response— this isn't justice, Darren. This is obsession." I felt a flicker of something that might have been doubt, but I pushed it aside. "You still don't understand. This isn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This is about demonstrating that actions have consequences." "Whose actions?" "Because from what I can see, your actions over the past 3 weeks have caused more harm than mine ever did. My actions have exposed the truth about who you really are. Your actions have revealed who you really are." The words hit harder than I'd expected, carrying a weight of accusation that made me uncomfortable. I'd spent 3 weeks convinced of my own righteousness, certain that everything I'd done was justified by Keena's betrayal. But sitting across from her in the lobby where this had all began, I found myself questioning that certainty for the first time. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm trying to say that maybe we both lost sight of who we were supposed to be. I betrayed you, and that was wrong. But you've spent 3 weeks systematically destroying everyone connected to that betrayal, including people who had nothing to do with our relationship." "Like who?" "Like Maria Santos, who's now under federal investigation because you decided to expose Greg's fraud. Like my parents, whose social reputation has been destroyed because you wanted to punish them for not liking you. Like Linda Stanton, who you've turned into a weapon against her ex-husband. Linda chose to provide that information. You manipulated her desire for revenge against Greg to serve your own purposes, just like you manipulated the media, the professional networks, and the legal system to achieve maximum damage to everyone involved. I felt a growing unease as she continued, her voice gaining strength and clarity. You've become everything you accused me of being. Manipulative, calculating, willing to destroy other people to get what you want. What I want is accountability. What you want is revenge, and you've gotten it. The question is whether you can stop before you destroy yourself in the process. I looked around the lobby, suddenly aware of the other conversations happening around us, the normal interactions between people who weren't consumed by the need to prove their righteousness through the systematic destruction of their enemies. You think I should just forgive and forget? Pretend none of this happened? I think you should recognize that you've made your point. Everyone involved has experienced consequences for their actions, including you. What consequences have I experienced? Look at yourself, Darren. When's the last time you had a conversation that wasn't about revenge? When's the last time you felt satisfied with anything that wasn't connected to our destruction? The question hung in the air between us, forcing me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding. For 3 weeks, my entire existence had revolved around planning and executing consequences for Keena's betrayal. I'd become so focused on destruction that I'd lost track of what I was supposed to be building instead. You want me to feel sorry for you. I want you to feel sorry for yourself, because the man I married was better than this. The man you married was naive enough to believe that marriage meant something. The man I married was kind, thoughtful, and capable of forgiveness. What you've become is someone who uses other people's weaknesses against them and calls it justice. I stood up abruptly, suddenly unable to sit still under the weight of her accusations. This conversation is over. Is it? Because I think you came here hoping I'd give you a reason to escalate further. Another betrayal, another justification for more revenge. I came here because you said you wanted to apologize. I do want to apologize. For betraying you, for humiliating you, for making choices that damaged our relationship irreparably. But I also want you to understand that what you've done in response has been worse than anything I did to you. Worse. I hurt one person who loved me. You've hurt everyone connected to our situation, including people who were innocent of any wrongdoing. You've turned yourself into someone who destroys lives for satisfaction and calls it accountability. I walked toward the lobby entrance, needing to escape the conversation and the uncomfortable truths it was forcing me to confront. But Keena's voice followed me. The saddest part is that you're going to wake up tomorrow and realize that all this revenge hasn't made you feel better. It's just made you someone you wouldn't have recognized 3 weeks ago. I pushed through the hotel's revolving door and walked into the Seattle evening, my mind racing with arguments and justifications. But underneath the familiar anger, I felt something new and unwelcome. The possibility that Keena might be right. I drove home through streets that seemed different somehow, as if the city itself had changed while I'd been focused on destruction. My house, which had felt like a fortress during the past 3 weeks, now felt empty and isolated. I poured myself a drink and sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my campaign against Keena and Greg. Files, photographs, legal documents, media clippings, the accumulated proof of 3 weeks spent perfecting the art of revenge. For the first time since this had all began, I allowed myself to question whether the satisfaction I'd felt had been worth the person I'd become in pursuit of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. "Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, realizing that I hadn't thought about anything except revenge for so long that I'd lost track of the relationships that actually mattered. I typed back, "Can we talk tomorrow? I think I need some perspective." "Of course, whatever you need." I set the phone aside and looked around my empty house, finally understanding what Keena had been trying to tell me. I'd won every battle in this war, achieved every objective I'd set for myself, and destroyed everyone who'd wronged me. But somewhere in the process of perfecting my revenge, I'd lost track of who I was supposed to be when it was over. The last course had been served, and it tasted exactly like I'd expected: bitter, satisfying, and ultimately empty. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether the person I'd become was worth the price I'd paid to create him.